This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Laura Trevelyan. A deadly earthquake strikes western China, leaving hundreds dead, tens of thousands injured, and reducing entire towns to rubble. It was a deadly and chaotic scene in western China today as a series of strong earthquakes struck, killing a reported 600 people and leaving more than 10,000 injured. Houses made of mud and wood simply collapsed when the tremors hit. And in the aftermath of the 6.9 magnitude quake, many fled into the streets, while students were buried inside damaged schools. The epicenter was in Qinghai province, from where the BBC's Damien Grammaticus sent this report.
They had little chance of withstanding the shock. People lived here in low-rise buildings, many made from mud and stone. Now the fear is thousands could lie buried in the remains of their houses after they just crumbled when the earthquake struck. The destruction in Jiegu, close to the epicenter, is extensive. 80% of buildings have collapsed. These were the first pictures to emerge from the disaster zone. They were shot from a surveillance camera mounted on a police car shortly after the 6.9 magnitude quake struck early in the morning.
Power and water were all cut, and there is little heavy lifting equipment to help in the rescue.
The area is prone to earthquakes. The epicenter was in Yushu County, just 20 miles from Jiegu, one of the biggest towns in southern Qinghai. This one appears to have been particularly devastating because the epicenter was close to the surface, just 6 miles down. And this was a school. As it came down, some students managed to run out, escaping alive. But by mid-afternoon, they were pulling bodies out of the rubble, more than 20, most of them girls. Another 40 are still thought to lie under the debris.
People are trying to dig survivors out of the rubble with really very basic equipment. There seems to be a lack of excavating equipment and logistical problems in getting much-needed equipment into the area.
Within hours, China began mobilizing a rescue effort. Soldiers and specialist teams from around the country heading for Qinghai province. But the earthquake zone is in the remote mountains bordering Tibet, 12,000 feet above sea level and hundreds of kilometers from the nearest major city. Chinese seismologists monitored many aftershocks hitting the area, while engineers raced to drain a reservoir that had developed cracks and they feared could burst. Eyewitnesses said the losses in Yushu were huge. The main hospital had been damaged and medical help was urgently needed. "We have nothing now," said one survivor.
And with nightfall has come a new problem, temperatures falling below zero. It's why the rescue teams flying in to head to the earthquake zone will be bringing blankets and tents as a priority, because so many are now without shelter at high altitude. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News in Qinghai province in western China.
The BBC's Chris Hogg is also in Qinghai province en route to the areas worst hit by the earthquake. And we can speak to him by phone now. Chris, can you describe for us what you're seeing on the road?
Well, dawn has come to Qinghai province. The sun is just coming over the mountains. We've been driving for several hours now, and we keep seeing these very long convoys of military vehicles, some of them holding big lifting equipment, big diggers, that kind of thing. We've seen ambulances, a lot of military personnel. I mean, clearly this relief operation is stepping up a gear now, and as you heard in that package, there is a need for all this stuff, but they're still, I would say, 8 or 9 hours away from the worst hit areas, so it's going to be some time before all this heavy lifting equipment gets there.
Chris, thank you very much indeed for the latest there. Now, today's earthquake in China comes just months after deadly tremors in Haiti and in Chile, leaving many wondering whether such incidents are on the rise or just happening in more populated areas. For answers, we turn now to Dr. Walter Mooney, a seismologist at the US Geological Survey, who joins us now from Denver. Dr. Mooney, so tell us, are earthquakes on the increase, or does it just seem like it?
Well, Laura, the recent earthquake in western China really is very tragic because of the loss of life, and it leads to that obvious question, are we seeing more earthquakes than ever before? And the answer is that in the last 4 months, we've had 6 great earthquakes, which means that in this year, we can expect 18 great earthquakes, and we typically have 16. So in fact, we aren't really seeing an increase in great earthquakes. What we're seeing is earthquakes striking vulnerable communities. And that graphic report from Western China with collapsed buildings, 80% collapsing, shows you that the earthquakes, unfortunately, are striking some of our most vulnerable communities, and that's what we're really noticing.
Now, in our sophisticated computer age, is there any way of predicting when earthquakes may strike those vulnerable communities?
Well, we're doing better and better at forecasting the likely locations of where earthquakes can strike and with what magnitude. We had a pretty good idea that the earthquake that struck in Chile would fill a seismic gap, an area that hadn't had an earthquake since 1835. Unfortunately, we haven't yet found the silver bullet that gives us the solution to the timing of the earthquakes. So, no, we can't predict earthquakes, but we are pretty good at determining those locations that are most vulnerable.
Now, do you think, for example, there could be a major earthquake here in the US at any point?
Well, we're quite concerned about that, as you might imagine. I'm from San Francisco and work at the U.S. Geological Survey office there. Our last earthquake on the Hayward Fault was 1868, and it repeats about every 150 years. So we're in the window when we can expect in my hometown a magnitude 7 earthquake. We're quite concerned. Likewise, in Southern California, there is a stretch of the San Andreas Fault that hasn't had a major earthquake on it for about 300 years, and typically they're about 200 or 220 years apart. So Southern California is another area where we think we have a high probability of a large earthquake. So yes, we are concerned here in the United States, and we need to prepare for the inevitable big one that is going to strike sometime in the coming years or decades.
Dr. Mooney, thank you for that very sobering insight. It was just 3 months ago that Haiti was hit by a massive quake, which left nearly 250,000 people dead and more than 1 million homeless. Yesterday, the First Lady, Michelle Obama, saw firsthand the devastation which remains. I was there for her visit and have just returned from Port-au-Prince, where one homeless camp offers a view at what so many there are facing. Haiti's heavy rains have arrived early. Just look at that mud. The geography of Port-au-Prince, combined with the location of the camps, makes the rain threatening. These dirt paths will be impassable once the storms are here in earnest. Because the rainy season is here, and this camp's in an exposed position on a hillside, people are at risk from mudslides, as if they hadn't suffered enough with the earthquake. So they're being moved to a new home 9 miles north. Even though the conditions here are so difficult, cramped and crowded, I'm finding that not everyone wants to leave. At the Pétionville camp, in what was once a golf course for Haiti's elite, Dieudonné Marshall and his 6 children have settled into a new rhythm since the earthquake. Dieudonné is a driver, his children go to school. He tells me they don't want to be moved out of the city. It would cost him too much in bus fares. Further into the camp, we found Eloise Ali doing her washing. Essential daily tasks like laundry are a struggle here, where it's almost impossible to keep things clean. Eloise wants to leave. She's worried about the effect the rain and the mud will have on her child. The United Nations identified more than 30,000 people who could be at risk from mudslides if they don't move. A second disaster in the making. So families are gathering up their belongings, registering for a new camp and getting on buses, moving yet again. Even more dislocation in lives already so fractured. The lingering impact of the earthquake in Haiti 3 months on. And today in India, it was a cyclone packing winds of more than 100 miles per hour, which has killed almost 90 people. The strong winds destroyed thousands of homes and uprooted trees in 3 villages of West Bengal. Authorities have rushed medical teams and food supplies to the region, while temporary shelters are being set up for those now left homeless. Meanwhile, in Iceland, it's a volcanic eruption which has forced hundreds of people to evacuate. The volcano, which is located under a glacier in the southwest part of the country, is now active for the second time in less than a month. And geologists warn the eruption could lead to destructive floods. Well, let's get more now on our top story, the earthquake that struck the remote Chinese province of Qinghai. Joining me from Beijing is our correspondent, Michael Bristow. Michael, a difficult night for survivors. Talk us through the rescue operation.
Well, that's the stage we're moving into at the moment. The Chinese government is coordinating a massive operation which also involves the People's Liberation Army Air Force. They've already sent in 2 large transport planes with equipment and rescue workers there with sniffer dogs. The task there is to get on the ground as quickly as possible to try and rescue as many people who are still trapped and alive under the rubble. They're also going to be transporting heavy equipment to the small airport which is there in Yushu County as soon as they possibly can today. Other government departments providing funds and relief supplies which will be transported to the airport, to the area. But there is a difficulty in getting equipment there, and most of it is going to have to come via road, mostly from Qinghai's capital, Xining, which is a journey of a good few hours, perhaps 12 hours or more.
And there are reports of concerns over a dam. That must be incredibly worrying.
There are, yes. There apparently was a crack in the dam yesterday caused by the earthquake, and what engineers have done is they've let some of the water out of that dam and released some water. One organisation said overnight that many people, as many as 100,000 people downstream of this dam would be potentially at threat if it broke and water was released, but the Chinese authorities seem to be aware at least of that problem. But there are other issues as well, most notably the people who survived this earthquake. They spent one night in freezing temperatures up in a very remote area which is above 4,000 metres above sea level, so temperatures plummet to below freezing at night. They've mostly had to rely on their own, on themselves last night, so the challenge will be to get medical supplies, blankets, tents into those people who've actually survived this earthquake.
OK, Michael Bristow in Beijing, thank you for that. At least 100 people have been killed by a cyclone in northeastern India, close to the border with Bangladesh. Worst hit is the Uttar Dinajpur district. Rescuers there have found 31 bodies. Our South Asia correspondent Chris Morris reports from Delhi.
This is the result of what's known locally as a nor'wester, a storm which develops over the Bay of Bengal in the hot summer months. And this was a bad one, the worst storm some locals have ever seen.
There has been a huge loss of both lives and property here. Almost all the houses have been damaged. Some houses have lost roofs. The road is also in bad condition. We have never seen such destruction ever in our lives.
Tens of thousands of houses, many of them made of mud with tin or thatched roofs, have been damaged or destroyed. Deaths have been reported from the states of West Bengal and Bihar, as well as across the border in Bangladesh. For nearly an hour, at about midnight, devastating winds tore across the region, uprooting trees and bringing down power lines. Storms are something of an occupational hazard in this part of the world, and state governments have already announced relief packages for the people who've been affected. But that doesn't diminish the sense of shock among poor communities who often struggle to survive in the best of times. Chris Morris, BBC News, Delhi.
Talking of nature's wrath, rescue teams in northwestern China are battling freezing temperatures and high altitude as they attempt to find any survivors from yesterday's devastating earthquake. 600 people are known to have died, but hundreds more remain unaccounted for, and convoys of troops and supplies have travelled hundreds of miles through sleet and sandstorms to reach the remote and mountainous Qinghai province. Quentin Somerville reports from Beijing.